They built it like clockwork. Every tick of manipulation, every talk of illusion down to the last gear of your reactions. The script was polished, rehearsed in rooms you were never allowed to enter. They didn't need to yell to control you. They simply made you feel like your voice was an inconvenience. That was the brilliance of it. They didn't silence you, they trained you to edit yourself. Their plan was flawless, not because it was complicated, but because it was subtle. Micro cuts disguised as jokes, delays packaged as patience, control dressed as protection. It was psychological orchestration, a maze designed not to trap you but to tame you. And you played your part, didn't you? Not because you were weak, but because you were loyal. Because you thought the silence was a test, not a verdict. Because you confused endurance with worth. They needed you to stay predictable. That was the core of the whole architecture. They didn't mind your strength as long as it bowed. They didn't mind your brilliance as long as it dimmed when they entered. You were never supposed to see it. The repetition, the patterns, the way they inserted guilt into every boundary you tried to draw. They crafted the illusion so meticulously that even your instincts were ghastly. You'd feel the wrongness, and they'd smile. You'd speak your truth, and they'd tilt their head like you were being dramatic. And the scariest part? You started believing them. That was the move they counted on. That you'd stay confused long enough for them to tighten the noose of control into a necklace of codependency. That you'd be so desperate to stay loved that you'd sign your own emotional eviction. But every plan, no matter how airtight, has one variable it can't account for: awakening. That flicker, that moment, that internal earthquake when something in you snaps. Not in rage, but in realization. You didn't scream. You didn't break down. You went still. You started watching, counting, connecting dots. You traced the echoes of their narratives and found the echo chamber they'd built around your mind. And then you made that move. The one they feared, the one that unraveled the entire machinery. You didn't fight, you didn't explain, you disengaged. Not loudly, quietly. Like someone who's realized the cage was always open. Like someone who no longer needs to be understood in a language designed to keep them small. Disengagement, detachment, the ultimate defiance. Because manipulators don't panic when you cry, they panic when you no longer care, when your heartbeat no longer syncs with their chaos, when you walk away without the urge to look back, even once. That's the collapse they didn't plan for. That's the power move they couldn't script. See, their control depended on your response. But when you removed yourself from the equation, the algorithm collapsed. You became an unknown variable. And nothing terrifies control freaks more than unpredictability. You didn't need to raise your voice. You just had to raise your value. Internally, quietly, ruthlessly. You stopped explaining yourself to people who mistook your kindness for currency. The brilliance of your move was in its simplicity. You stopped performing, stopped reacting, stopped begging for rooms that couldn't hold you. And in that silence, you became dangerous. Not to the world, but to the order they relied on. You shattered their sense of control by simply choosing yourself. That was the move they feared, that you'd remember, that you'd see clearly, that you'd no longer need them to mirror your worth. Their plan was flawless, until you exited the stage, until you stopped playing the character they wrote for you. You walked off script, and the spotlight burned out in their hands. They're still standing there, in that broken theater of illusions, still rehearsing the same lines, still hoping you'll return to your mark. But you've left the building. You're not in that scene anymore. You're in a new story now, one that doesn't require applause, one where you write your lines in real time, with blood and boundaries and brilliance. They don't know how to follow you here. Because this version of you doesn't respond to bait, doesn't explain the silence, doesn't open old doors. You pulled the move that ends manipulation. You moved on. Fully, finally, fearlessly. That shift you made, it didn't just free you, it exposed them. Their tactics look clumsy now, transparent. Without you playing your part, their methods have nowhere to land. The guilt doesn't stick. The shame has no roots. You robbed them of the reaction that gave them relevance. You walked out of their ecosystem, and now their patterns look like noise in a room that has gone eerily quiet. You changed the frequency, and now they're speaking into an empty hallway, wondering why no one flinches anymore. This was never about revenge. You didn't burn anything down. You just took the fire back into your own hands. And suddenly the light changed. People started seeing the truth. They started noticing the way your absence rearranged everything. That's the mark of real power. When you don't have to destroy someone to dismantle their empire, you simply exit. And their entire structure begins to collapse under the weight of your absence because you were never the weak one. You were the foundation. They just built too many lies on top of you. So now you walk with a different rhythm, not as a survivor, not as a victim, but as an architect of your time, of your energy, of your standards. You carry no guilt, no apologies, just clarity, just presence. You became the anomaly in their code, the one move they never planned for. You were supposed to be broken, but you were built. You were supposed to beg, but you walked. You were supposed to unravel, that you rewired. And now every room you enter shifts, not because you need control, but because you own yourself. And that's the kind of presence even the most flawless plan can't prepare for. They noticed it in the silence first. Not just the lack of your voice, but the absence of your gravity. The subtle way the room stopped holding its shape, the way conversations lost their rhythm, the way tension began to hum through spaces that used to orbit your energy. You weren't loud. You didn't announce your departure, but your withdrawal rearranged the architecture. Suddenly, the things they took for granted had gaps, questions without your insights, plans without your precision, chaos without your calm. They started looking for your reaction out of habit, only to find a void. And that void, that was your masterpiece. Because true power doesn't exit with fireworks. It exits with a stillness so deep, it echoes. They never thought you were the cornerstone. That was the lie they told themselves, that you were replaceable, that your presence was supplemental. And so they shrugged when you grew quiet, laughed when you stepped back. But then the gears started stalling. Not dramatically, but subtly, inevitably. The mood shifted, the momentum slowed. People who used to feel confident in your presence now stumbled. They couldn't name the loss, but they felt it, like a thread had been pulled from the center, and suddenly the whole design sagged. That's how your absence hit them, not as punishment, but as exposure. It showed them who had been holding the room together the entire time. And it wasn't them, it was you. They thought keeping you around was a favor. That tolerating your standards, your honesty, your unwavering intuition was some kind of sacrifice on their part. But your absence revealed the truth they couldn't face. You were the stability they fed off. You were the grounding wire, the silent architect, the one who buffered the fallout of their recklessness without ever demanding credit. And now that you're gone, their games no longer land, their performances fall flat. They're exposed to their own chaos. You didn't break them. You just stopped carrying their dysfunction. And when you did, everything they tried to control begins slipping through their fingers. They used to roll their eyes at your boundaries, laugh at your instincts, tell others you were too serious, too intense, too much. But now those very traits are the ones they miss. Now they're choking on their own words. Because without your discernment, the group fractures. Without your silence, their noise becomes unbearable. That's the paradox. They never praised your strength when it was near, but they crumble without it. Because you weren't just a person in the room. You were the alignment, the unspoken force that kept the narrative clean, the edges sharp, the rot from spreading. They couldn't define what you gave, but now they feel what they lost. And here's the part that truly unravels them. You're not punishing anyone. You're not avoiding them. You're simply no longer accessible. You didn't storm out. You didn't write a dramatic letter. You just stopped offering yourself to people who fumble you. That's the kind of withdrawal that doesn't ask for attention, but steals it anyway. You became a ghost they still hope to impress. A memory that sits at the edge of their conscience like a weight. You didn't retaliate. You elevated. You chose distance over revenge. And in doing so, you created a power that haunts them without a sound. They reach for you in subtle ways now. They test the waters, send messages masked in casual tones, try to pull you back into conversations you outgrew, but your new self doesn't flinch. You don't return out of nostalgia. You don't shrink back to fit their comfort. You see the old stage, the same recycled lines, and you know you were never the extra in their play. You were the director who walked off set, and without you, the script falls apart. They're reciting words into a space that no longer answers. That silence, that's the reminder that you didn't vanish, you recalibrated, and they're still adjusting to your absence like it's a storm that keeps shifting the sky. There's a science to the kind of power you wield now. It's built on what you don't say, what you don't chase, what you don't explain. People misinterpret energy all the time. They mistake kindness for consent, attention for need. But you've left all that behind. Your silence has layers now. It speaks. It confronts. It unsettles. They can't get under your skin anymore because you've changed the architecture of your skin itself. You don't break where you used to. You don't bend where you used to yield. And now the room bends around you. Because your presence created order, but your absence, that created reflection. You're not angry. That's what confuses them most. You're not bitter. You've just outgrown the terrain. You're operating from a different elevation now, one where you no longer need to be understood, where your validation comes from your alignment, not their approval. You return only to spaces that match your vibration, not out of arrogance, but out of preservation. You've learned the cost of staying where you're tolerated, and now you only invest where you're respected. That shift is the earthquake they never saw coming. Because power used to be loud in their world, but yours is surgical. They replay moments now, don't they? Moments they dismissed, interrupted, or brushed off. Your insights they once mocked now echo as warnings they should have heeded. Your boundaries they once scoffed at now stand as monuments to everything they lacked. But here's the twisted beauty. They don't regret losing you out of love. They regret losing the leverage your presence gave them. You were the silent backbone, the unseen strategist, the emotional regulator they could always lean on without ever saying thank you. Now that you've removed yourself from their circuitry, everything short circuits, not because you cursed them, but because you no longer carried them. And their systems, they weren't built to run without you. That's the mark of real power. It doesn't scream. It simply stops showing up, and everything rearranges in its absence. You've entered your sovereign phase, the era of calibrated energy, where nothing drains you unless you hand it permission. You don't re-enter rooms out of nostalgia, and you don't grant access out of guilt. You've become a mirror people flinch to look into, because you don't reflect what they pretend to be, you reflect what they truly are. And the more you glow without their fuel, the more it exposes how little they ever gave. That silence you walk in with now, it is not emptiness. It's evolved presence. A presence that rearranges dynamics, deconstructs facades, and rewrites expectations the second you breathe into the room. You were never seeking to be the loudest. You just became the most unshakable. And that's a kind of power the world cannot ignore, even when it no longer has the privilege to hold it.